Are you sometimes overwhelmed by the news and the moral dilemmas and changes in modern medicine that now confront us each day? Find out what you can do about it in this edition of Life Matters with Brian Johnston, Western Regional Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives. As California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
This is Brian Johnston, and I want to remind you that while I have many affiliations, I alone am responsible for my comments. Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on the right to life, on what it really is. You see, the right to life isn't about your feelings. It isn't even about how much we love babies or moms, and we do. No, the right to life is a very specific statement that human lives are a gift from our Creator and that the government needs to protect human lives for it to be a just government, that the innocent lives under its care, so to speak, under its oversight, must be protected and not killed willy-nilly. If the government does not protect the lives of the innocent, it is an unjust government. A very important premise. That's the reason it's there. And before 1973, there were laws in every state against killing innocent babies, against the medical killing of innocent babies. Not only because it's taking that baby's life, but as we now know, and as a lot of churches emphasize, this really hurts women. It doesn't feel good afterwards. If a woman's been talked into killing her baby, and then she realizes maybe that's not the best thing, she's not going to feel good. And there's many other implications. But the fact is, the bottom line, it's about the fact that the laws were changed. And so we do on Life Matters, we talk about these laws and why ultimately, if you're not caring about the laws, and in this last election, if you did not get involved and vote pro-life, then you're not a pro-lifer. I'm sorry. Or if you accept what the leftist media wants to do is redefine what pro-life is. Make it very vague and specific and general feelings. If you were seduced by that, then you've lost. You don't understand this battle of ideas because the right to life is a clear-cut, self-evident truth. And it's an idea that we have based our freedoms on. Every other freedom in America emanates from the fact that human lives are incredibly significant in and of themselves. That's a premise of Western civilization, by the way, that human beings aren't merely animals to be herded. Even smart animals. Dogs are smart animals. But human beings throughout Western civilization have been regarded as having something more. And it is that something more, that spiritual quality, what the Judeo-Christian tradition refers to as basically a divine spark, as the image of God. That is an essential premise of our society, and it's been lost. And if you're willing to have it lost, then you will be herded. Then you won't understand the purpose of government. And you'll think it is about feelings. If the government can do something to make you feel good, then it's doing its job. You have missed this battle of ideas. Today we're going to talk about in a post-election environment, and now you know it's not post-election. The battle continues. I want to spend some time on the very specific disinformation that has come out and has been pounded into your heads and in the heads of your loved ones. The first has to do with Amy Coney Barrett and the intentional, historical disinformation, what in polite society is called lies, regarding the right of an elected Congress that shares in the Senate, shares the same party affiliation with the president, whether or not they have the right to appoint a justice in an election year. That was made into a huge violation of history, but no, it wasn't. We're going to talk about that and give you some very specific reasons why you need to cleanse your mind and anybody who brings that up, because the goal is to assert that Amy Coney Barrett is somehow illegitimate. And that's a lie. That's what's known as disinformation. It must be dispelled. We're going to talk about the nature of the political battle and the battle of ideas right now because it's still raging. And again, elections is merely the time that ideas come to a head because laws are basically ideas that are enforced. So elections are very important in the battle of ideas. And again, here at Life Matters, that's what we talk about. The battle of ideas, the right to life. is actually about the battle of ideas, and you better be ready. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Amy Coney Barrett and why her appointment was truly important and very, very appropriate and legal. We're also going to talk about COVID-19 and the disinformation surrounding COVID-19 and the culture of fear that has generated. It's impacted the elections. It's impacted our culture. It's impacted people's view of the government and what the government should and should not do. And it's based on a lot of disinformation. We're going to talk about that. We're ultimately going to cap off by talking about this confusion of ideas, because that's really what we're seeing. And unless you have the clarity to know what is true, we've talked about that, there is a way to know what's true. Leftists, progressives, relativists say, there's a truth for you, and there's a truth for me, and whatever you want to do, that's fine. That isn't really what they believe. They believe in their truth, and it doesn't have to be true. That's the problem, is that they predicate their actions on relativism so that they can force that which is not true onto others. It's extremely dangerous, and unless you cut through that verbal, if you will excuse the phrase, it's actually verbal and intellectual crap. That's right. It is disordered thinking, and they believe if they say it right, put the right emotions, if they give the right narrative, well then you'll see it as true too. But they're not presenting what's actually true. You have to understand the war of disinformation that's raging right now. We're going to equip you to do that, and we're going to end up talking about the classical world and classical times. Many of you know that I used to teach Latin. I encourage you, if you homeschool, teach your kids Latin. Expose them to Latin. There's many reasons. It's the mother of the many languages, the Romance languages, but more importantly, in our own language, it's the basis for much of our vocabulary. It's the language of medicine. It's the language of science. Very important that Latin be used, and it's also very useful, and we'll talk about this and give you examples. You can recognize newspeak, what George Orwell referred to as newspeak, and that's when the government changes the meaning of words. We're going to examine that actually happening in the case of Amy Coney Barrett, happening overnight. So we're talking about disinformation. You have to be ready, and you have to be ready to tell others so that they aren't also trapped in the futility of their mind to do that which is wrong. When they start believing disinformation, that which is not true, when they start taking disordered thinking and presenting it as true, you're going to end up with a lot of bad things happening. So we're talking about disinformation in the age of COVID, in 2020, and in the battle of ideas and elections. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Life Matters.
They say sunlight is the best disinfectant. Did you know that California has a law in the books that says you need to protect babies born alive in the course of an abortion? But that law is simply ignored. The current legislature and Governor Newsom's administration support all abortions all the time, and they simply do not examine or regulate the practice even though our tax dollars pay for it. We need to shine a light on this cover-up of the abortion industry in our state. Go to californiaprolife.org and click on the Light of Day Project. We need the facts about late-term abortion to be examined and made known. We need the government doing its job to protect lives. We need the light of day on this. Go to californiaprolife.org.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back. We're talking about Justice Amy Coney Barrett and the fact that intentional disinformation campaign, what normal people call lies, has been broadcast by the media and the Democrat Party vociferously until people simply stopped talking about it. Then they later assert it as truth because they said it. But it's not true. It's got nothing to do with reality or history. They have said the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett this late in an election year is simply wrong. And that look what happened to a similar situation when President Obama made an appointment. His appointment confirmation hearings didn't even take place. And they're right when they say that, because the Senate was controlled by the opposite party of the nominating president. And throughout history, if the party of the president and the party of the Senate are the same, that Senate quickly, very quickly as you will see, confirms that justice. Not only that, there have been several times in history where after the election and after that president lost the election, the lame duck president nominated someone anyways. So they are intentionally lying about history. They're trying to get people worked up, mostly their base, that literally at times will riot if need be. You are involved in a battle of ideas, and ideas can only be expressed through language, through words. It's critically important that you see that that's going on even at the highest level of government and of communication, and it's happening right now. Be ready. Listen to Senator Mazie Hirono attacking Amy Coney Barrett at the hearing.
Not once, but twice, you use the term sexual preference to describe those in the LGBTQ community. And let me make clear, sexual preference is an offensive and outdated term. It is used by anti-LGBTQ activists to suggest that sexual orientation is a choice. It is not. Sexual orientation is a key part of a person's identity.
But the phrase sexual preference has actually been used by homosexual publications and magazines earlier that same month. No, what happened that night will stun you. The Merriam-Webster dictionary that night online changed the definition of sexual preference and declared that it was considered a deeply offensive slur against the homosexual community. This is happening right now. It's a battle for ideas. You can double check that, by the way, at Newsweek. It was one of the few secular publications that covered that change in language. It was also at the Daily Mail, a British publication. But most major media outlets don't explain the real battle that's going on because most major media outlets are part of this battle of ideas. You must be ready to speak up for what's true. You even are going to have to defend the words that are used. Do not let false words and false definitions stand. Insist on what is true and objectively measurable. If you don't, you're going to get taken. And your loved ones are going to get taken, and our culture will be taken in this battle of ideas. So this is an intentional act of disinformation, and I want you to think about disinformation. It causes confusion. We're going to talk about this at the very end of the program and the purpose of confusion in the battle of ideas, because you need to be sure that you're thinking clearly. You need to understand that disordered thinking about particular ideas causes great confusion and animus and ultimately conflict. And that's why we talk about the war of ideas, the battle of ideas. That's what's at stake here. Let me tell you about the history of appointments to the Supreme Court. There were, in fact, many times in history. In 19 cases, the president's party held the Senate. 17 of the 19 vacancies were filled. The exceptions being the bipartisan filibuster against Lyndon Johnson's nominees in 1968 and George Washington's withdrawal and resubmission in the next Congress of a nominee who was ineligible to be confirmed. He'd voted to create the court, and the Constitution made him wait until there was a new Congress seated. 9 of those 17 were confirmed before the election, and 8 were confirmed after. 3 were confirmed in lame duck post-election sessions, even though the president had just lost re-election. So the Democrats are upset that the president, before the election, made a nomination. Several times in our history, a president has lost the election, and while waiting for the new president to come in, it's what's known as a lame duck session, well, the president who lost made an appointment anyways. So the Democrat Party right now, and really the major media, is lying to you about American history. It's very simple. If the party of the president and the party of the Senate are the same, throughout history, they have gone ahead and had confirmation hearings, and usually that justice is seated. In 10 cases, the party opposing the president held the Senate. Only 1 of the 10 got a nominee confirmed. So it's very common, and I'll remind you that actually Vice President Biden, while he was chairman of the Judiciary Committee, he threatened then-President George H.W. Bush that he dare not bring an appointment in an election year. He dare not. So he, Joe Biden himself, as a senator, underscored that if the Senate's controlled by an opposing party, they're going to oppose that nomination. And that's a historical truth. Now, in 10 cases, the party opposing the president held the Senate. Only one of the 10 got a nominee confirmed. 2 were confirmed after the election when the president's party won the election. And 1, when Dwight Eisenhower nominated William Brennan and it created the Brennan Court. 1 was a pre-election recess appointment that was then confirmed by the new Senate in the new year after Eisenhower was reelected. Now, it is true that none of the nominees confirmed before the election passed the Senate later than mid-July. Why? Mostly because the Senate was out of session. And that's the problem. They're trying to redefine history. But we saw this confirmation happen very, very quickly, and that's happened before in history. In 1828, a vacancy opened on August 25th, but the Senate was out of session until December 1st. John Quincy Adams set up John Crittenden's nomination on December 17th. But the Jacksonian Democrats controlled the Senate, and Adams had just lost the election to Andrew Jackson. So the seat was held open for Jackson to fill. In 1852, a vacancy opened in July. Millard Fillmore sent up the nomination of Edward Bradford on August 16th. The Senate, controlled by the Democrats, Fillmore was a Whig, they tabled Bradford's nomination and went home until December. 2 more Fillmore nominees were rejected by that lame duck Senate. In 1860, this is important, a vacancy opened on May 31st. The Senate was in session and controlled by James Buchanan's Democrats. But with the party fracturing in two, it was the second effort at a convention that was held in June 18th that was ending in a Southern walkout. The Southern Democrats, as you knew, were very pro-slavery. Lincoln wanted to end slavery. Buchanan failed to submit a nomination before the session ended in late June. That's 1860. And then he lost in the election of 1860. And the Senate adjourned until December. By the time Buchanan finally submitted Jeremiah Black's nomination in February, many of the Democrats had left the Senate because their states had seceded. The Republicans now controlled the chamber. The nomination of Justice Black lost by 1 vote, and the seat was left open to be filled by Abraham Lincoln. In 1864, Lincoln's nemesis, Roger Taney, had been Chief Justice. He actually wrote the Dred Scott decision, one of the most evil decisions before Roe v. Wade. Why? Because it used the power of government to make sure that slavery was a legal thing in all of the states. People don't realize what the Dred Scott decision did, and that's what Roe v. Wade did with abortion. It swept through. It took one case and said, no, this is legal. Dred Scott can be a slave even though he was living in a free state. He could still be considered chattel property. So when Justice Taney died, the Republicans controlled the Senate, and Lincoln sent the nomination of Salmon P. Chase, former Treasury Secretary of Chief Justice. Chase was confirmed that day. So history has shown many times, many times, where the Supreme Court can be filled by a sitting president when that Senate also shares the president's concern. Here's another thing brought up about Justice Coney Barrett, and that is that somehow it's political, and the president said we need to have the court filled in case the election brings problems. But he was very specific, and wisely so. A tied court, and it would be likely a tied court. The reason there's 9 is so that there won't be ties. A tied court and an election year, an election issue that ended in a tie could create great public mayhem. And the reason the Supreme Court is there is to break a tie, to make final tough decisions. And I got to tell you, in such a case, there's no guarantee it would go towards Mr. Trump. He can't guarantee that because justices pledge themselves to deal with the law, not with personalities, as the media does. Media only cares about personalities and their ideology. But the court has to make determination on the law. So filling the court so that it was at the proper number of 9 was in order to prevent mayhem after an election that had difficult court decisions, as we're seeing. So it wasn't for self-interest, it was for the sake of the nation that Amy Coney Barrett was appointed. Remember, I'm telling you these things because there's a disinformation campaign to slander Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And if it's not challenged in your home, in your community, in your media market, then somehow she's seen as illegitimate. Don't let that happen. Fight for what's true and right and just. Now I'm going to spend a little time talking when I come back about the COVID-19 disinformation campaign, because it truly has been an incredible disinformation campaign designed specifically to suppress. And if you've seen any of the news, someone I actually have come to trust, Tucker Carlson, he's had individuals from China who were involved in the actual creation at government behest, creating a deadly virus. And his guest has said that this was intentionally created by the Communist Chinese Party. She is fearing for her life, but feels an obligation to make known what she did at the Wuhan factory of viruses. We'll be right back.
Life Matters continues after this.
Well, now we have a special opportunity for Life Matters listeners wherever you are. You can be on the air. That's right. If you have a question for Life Matters, we have a special way for you to ask that question. Tell us where you're listening from, speak slowly and clearly, and you can record a message. Go to lifematters.life. That's lifematters.life. Scroll to the bottom of the page, and there you'll see Send a Message to Brian Johnston. Using your computer's microphone, you can record a message, and it'll record clearly. You can't go longer than 90 seconds. But please feel free, if you have a question or a comment, make sure you keep it polite. We do have to edit, and we can't put impolite stuff on the air, but we do want to hear from you. That's lifematters.life. Scroll to the bottom of the page and give us your thoughts.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're talking about the battle of ideas, and that there are objective facts that can be known. That's been an assertion of science throughout Western civilization, that things can be known. There are what is known as self-evident truths that you can study, and you can continue, even if you get it wrong, you can continue to dig down and find out what's true, what really does work. That's the basis of science, that we live in an ordered universe. That if you're a Christian of any kind, you know this order came from a creator. But the fact that we have order to the universe is what allows science to even work. So there are truths that can be known. When truth is intentionally distorted, that's called disinformation. And we're going to spend a little time talking about COVID. We know that the SARS-2 virus, that's the actual name of the virus, came from Wuhan province. We know that it's nearly identical to the SARS-1 virus, which hit the world in 2004. If you'd like to know more about that, there are studies that have been done. In our podcast, we have gone into depth on SARS-1 and 2. We've also examined very deeply the whole issue of whether or not SARS can be treated. That's SARS-2, known as COVID-19. There's actually 3 episodes I'd like you to go back if you have a chance. We talk about the use of zinc, and then we talk about America's frontline doctors, the whole debate over hydroxychloroquine. Very important that you understand that. And I suggest you take some time and listen to our programs. We've talked about it, many others have, but most of it has been suppressed. You can understand this particular virus. It's a single-strand RNA virus. Once it gets into your cells, it pretends it's a protein, and then it grows in your cells, and that's what kills you. But it turns out there have been many, many studies. Go back and listen to those, 224, 225, 226, and then the case for America's doctors. What happens is that hydroxychloroquine lets zinc into your cells. The zinc stops the replication of the virus, but that's now been suppressed. That is not allowed. Google, I was sharing things with my son the other night and went to Google, and it turns out there have been many, many studies. When you click on Google, it says, we can't take you to those. So Google is now part of the disinformation campaign. They're suppressing knowledge. They're suppressing actual science and truth. As you know, if you've heard about the situation with the Biden son And those articles that are documented, Google is suppressing any discussion of what really happened with the Biden son and Mr. Biden and China. So there's disinformation that's going on. It's worldwide. You're in a battle of ideas. And I want to remind you, you're in a war, and it starts with ideas. Do you know that the word war is an Indo-European word? It comes to us from Gothic German, and it literally means confusion. That's what war means, confusion. So disinformation is purposely given to people to cause confusion. It's part of a war. What the Goths did, and by the way, the Goths were one of the few peoples who could defeat the Romans. And in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, the Goths defeated the Romans using confusion. You know about the Roman Empire. You know that the Roman legions were unstoppable. That's because they used order. They had learned it from the Greeks to march in a phalanx in a straight row and to use their shields and their swords together as a team. They were unstoppable. But not in confusion. At the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, what happened was the Goths let them come into the forest. And there they couldn't form ranks. And the Goths would attack them willy-nilly with confusion. And in the confusion, 3 Roman legions were lost the first time in history. It changed history. In fact, that was in the year 9. So for Christians, Jesus was about 9 years old. And the Roman Empire had a great hit at that time because of the use of confusion as an implement of war. That's important to understand the nature of what you're going through with confusion and the use of confusion to destroy, to kill. And that's what we're facing now, is the use of confusing ideas. We're in a battle of ideas. It's important to realize that you not surrender to the confusion, that you get the clarity of mind and the principles that you need to walk in and understand, and that you impart those to others. That's what we talk about here in Life Matters, the importance of ideas, the clarity of ideas, and particularly the idea that human lives are valuable, that innocent human lives need to be protected, that is the meaning of the right to life. And unless you're standing for that, if you're only following your feelings about babies or about moms, and you're not engaged in the battle of ideas, then you're not engaged in the right to life. So I want to remind you that this battle is not over. Continue to stand strong. Continue to seek clarity. Go to californiaprolife.org for more information on this battle. Or if you're outside of the state, go to nrlc.org. That's NRLC, the National Right to Life Committee.
Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.